Welcome to Yolanda Nava. Do you see what I see? I am so pleased and honored today to have with us Dolores Huerta, the founder of the Dolores Huerta Foundation. Dolores has been a champion of labor and civil rights, women's and human rights for practically all the decades of her life. We're honoring her today as we enter International Women's History Day and International Women's History Month, as a woman who has devoted her life to women's rights as human rights. I'm very excited and pleased to introduce to you now Dolores Huerta. Welcome, Dolores.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Yolanda, and so wonderful to be able to see you, even though it's through Zoom.
It is a wonderful experience, and I'm glad that we're able to connect. It's been many years. COVID and everything else has, kept people from getting together, so much in person. But I am interested today in talking to you about all of your contributions, and mainly on the front of women's rights as human rights, and the changes that have gone on, how far we've come, and yet how far we have yet to go, and your various transitions and the various roles you've played, from being involved as a high school teacher to entering into labor organizing with the United Farm Workers Union, to engaging in women's rights and human rights in the very early days of the feminist movement, to founding your foundation. So you've had an incredible life and trajectory, and we're honoring you today because you have done so much for human rights and for women's rights. First of all, I want to ask you, you started out as a high school teacher, as many of us did back in the day when, those were the choices for women. What was a triggering event that engaged you in organizing farm workers and laborers?
Well, actually, there were a couple of different events that really made me decide to quit being a teacher to become an organizer. And I had met Fred Ross Sr., whom I know that's somebody that you knew about, who was a great organizer, who organized actually in East Los Angeles when they got the first Latino elected, Eduardo Roybal, who I think you also knew, the first Mexican-American to be elected to the city council and then to the U.S. Congress. And there had been a bunch of labor leaders there, Tony Rios, who was with the IUE, Gil Anaya, who's with the Steelworkers Union, and others who they organized to get Roybal elected. The first time they lost, but then Fred Ross came in and showed them how to organize at the grassroots level, and they won. And then they started that organization, the Community Service Organization, throughout the state of California. And I was able to join in Stockton, and Fred Ross Sr. shared with us same organizing techniques that he had shown the people in East LA. And so at that time I was already teaching, and but after I learned how you could organize people, then I thought I can do more for farm workers by organizing them, teaching their hungry children, because so many of my students, actually it was elementary school that came into my classes, were malnourished, and these were not like Latino children. These were the children of the Dust Bowl people, they call the Okies, right? And I would have to argue with my principal to get them an extra milk ticket, an extra voucher for shoes. And so I just thought, I'm just going to just start organizing and then see how we can help them, how we can really help them, the farm workers. And of course, and Cesar, of course, had learned organizing from Fred Ross also. So I was a political director for the CSO, the Community Service Organization, and both Cesar and I had organized farm worker groups, I in Stockton and he in Oxnard. But when we turned them over to other unions, they dissolved. And so we said, that's when Cesar said, right there in Los Angeles, right there right there in East LA, we had a meeting. And Cesar said, we have to organize the farm workers. And that's how it started. But the two events that really triggered was one, when we were doing voter registration, going door to door, and I came to the home of a farm worker family that had orange crates and cardboard boxes for furniture and they had nothing on the floor. It was a dirt floor. And I thought, my God, this is wrong. And then my principal at my school where I was teaching said, oh, these people, they just drink up all the money they get. They're a bunch of alcoholics, and that's why the kids are so poor. And by the way, he was from Arkansas, my principal was. And I said, no, I know these families. They're hardworking families. So those two things really convinced me that I had to stop teaching and start organizing.
They were very exciting times. You know, you've been around a bit longer than me, but I remember those days. I remember meeting Ed Roybal when he was running for, I think, city council. I came up to his knees or something. I was a little girl at my aunt's home who had an event for him. And over the years, you know, I just love that man. He was such a wonderful, wonderful congressman and a real moral leader. It was very exciting. So you get involved with the farm workers union.
Get enough credit because he's the one that started the programs for aging.
Yes.
You know, and a very humble person. He never really tooted his own horn, and I'm glad they're finally going to make a documentary about his life.
It's about time because he was a black belt in karate and he balanced himself very well. And he was always a gentleman. He never raised his voice. He never yelled. He would argue and debate on the floor and speak, you know, out his feelings and his, you know, what he was involved in and what he believed needed to be done. He was a real gentleman, and it's, you know, I'm glad that they're going to do that too. So you're in the farm workers movement. You're a leader and a co-founder of the UFW with Cesar Chavez, and you also were engaged in the very early days of the feminist movement, the so-called women's liberation movement, which they tried to denigrate by calling us women's livers. But it was a liberation movement, as all social movements are. Any movement for social justice is a liberation movement of some kind. And you got involved very early on with Eleanor Smeal and Peg York in an organization called the Feminist Majority. How did that transition take place?
Well, you know, even before that, and I want to just dial back a little bit, during the boycott of the farm workers, one of our big supporters was Gloria Steinem.
Okay. Oh, really?
And so I met Gloria when I was on the Great Boycott in New York City, and Gloria was just phenomenal. Everywhere that she went, she took me with her. Every event that she spoke at, she would call me up. I'm going to speak at this place. Come with me. And so she was such a champion for the Farm Workers Union. And then, of course, we got into the whole issue of women's reproductive rights and women's right to abortion. And I, as a Latina, like many of us Latinas, you know, who grew up in the Catholic Church, and we were taught that abortion is a sin, etc. You know, I was very reluctant to embrace the whole issue that women had the right to abortion. So Gloria and I kind of, we sort of, might say we met in the middle and we talked about choice. Because as you know, Yolanda, I have 11 children, okay? Yes. At that time, I think I only had 8, you know, I had 4 more later on. Like, I guess maybe I had 7 and had, anyways, so we settled on the word choice. Because, you know, I chose to have the children that I had, the 7 children, and other women, of course, could choose not to have any children at all. But then when I met Eleanor Smeal, who you mentioned, then Ellie helped me transition that my thinking that not only is it a question of choice, it's a question of a woman's right, because a fetus is not a child. A fetus is not a child until it's born. And I think one of the great philosophers of the Catholic Church, St. Thomas Aquinas, I think he had come to that same conclusion in his writings. So I was able to transition and become much more proactive in promoting women's right to abortion, which we know is now at risk in the United States of America.
It's amazing how these junctures, you know, take place, because I remember Gloria Steinem's book and her view of pornography, her view of liberation. She was very enlightened and very intelligent. And as so many of the women's leaders back then and continue today, you know, they get denigrated for, you know, for their activism and for speaking out, you know, the truth. It's been an interesting thing because you mentioned St. Thomas Aquinas, and I've been rereading ancient and contemporary philosophy, indigenous, you know, religion, etc. And Aquinas just keeps popping up, and we need to look at him because there are shifting trends even within the Catholic Church, and it's fascinating to follow them and open up the conversations. But that was a very significant step. So the feminist majority forms, I remember Peg York distinctly because she was a member of the International Women's Forum, of which I've been a part since 1983. And those early feminists that I met, they were so exciting, you know, and they really fueled our own quest for principles that would guide us. And in LA at the time, and I met you during those years too, with Comisión Femenil, we were part of the lawsuit that opposed forced sterilization of Mexican and Mexican American women in Los Angeles County. And it's odd because, you know, today they don't want you to have birth control. They don't want you to have abortion. They don't want you to have any kind of choice. And they don't want to give you any money for your children if you have them, or help you in any way with, you know, low income food, et cetera, and education. So it's a crazy response to a very critical need and an important choice for women's rights as human rights. So you're engaged. What are is it synchronicity that takes place, that we meet people, we enter into a situation or event like, you know, choice or the forced sterilization, in my case, that changes us? Or did you see yourself, did you vision yourself having these roles so significantly in your life?
Well, you know, my mother was a feminist. Although back in those days, we never talked about the issues of abortion, et cetera. But she was, you know, my dad and my mom divorced when I was just a baby. So my mother was always the leading force in our family. And she left my dad because he was abusive. That's why she left him. And so she was very much a person was really supporter of women's rights and women's rights to stand up against male abuse, you know. And she was a businesswoman and the dominant figure in our family. And so I think I got a lot of my values from my mother. Like she said, you have to always make sure that you have your own bank account, you know, you don't let men tell you what to do. You always got to stand up for yourself. I mean, she was very much a feminist in that respect. And even my brothers were always saying, Mom always spoils you, you know, because she always made sure that I was always in front of everything. And my brothers sometimes resented that. But so I think I got a lot of my values from my mother in terms of women's rights and women's leadership. But the other thing that we did in the Feminist Majority Foundation is that we did a feminization of power campaign. And during our feminization of power campaign, we were advocating to get more women in the State Assembly of California and also in the Congress. And so I went to the state of California with a couple of other feminist majority organizers, and we met with women all up and down the state. And sometimes we'd have a meeting with 6 people, sometimes 12, sometimes 20. And in every assembly district where we met, we said to them, you've got to get a woman to run. And if you can't find someone, you have to run, okay? And they go, you know, and we did. So we got a lot of women to run, and a lot of women got elected. And this is the year when Hilda Solis, Janet Napolitano, Gwen Moore, we had Lucille Roybal, after she got elected to the Congress, Lucille Roybal Allard, Ed Roybal's daughter. So that year, I think we changed the state legislature to get almost 30% of the state legislature were women with our campaign that we did. That was really, and you know, it was interesting because Willie Brown, whom you knew, and another one, I'm not going to mention his name because he's still a good friend of mine, but they were very upset with us. In fact, Willie sent out people to counter and kind of, you might say, subvert some of our women that were running for office. And one of the Democratic leaders called me up and he was really upset. He said, Dolores, what are you doing getting all these women to run? I said, hey, nobody's ever complained about getting men to run.
Yes.
But that was a really good campaign, you know. And also that same year is when Lydia Velasquez from New York got the first Puerto Rican woman elected to the state legislature in New York. in New York State.
Well, those were exciting times, and I remember because when Gloria Bolita ran, that was the same thing. The power brokers, they called them the Golden Palominos. That was what Tony Castro, the Herald Examiner, used to call the guys that were giving the dedazo to certain male candidates automatically. And when Gloria was running, it was major. It was a major split, and thankfully, Ed Roybal, along with Congress Esteban Torres, supported Gloria Bolita. And I had to do a little bit of lobbying in those days, when I was married to Art, and to ensure that he was going to support her and the reasons why that was so important. So those were very interesting times. And we've always had to deal not only with the racism, the issue of being an ethnic in this society in California, in this nation, but also the sexism that we had to deal with, not only from the larger society, in terms of jobs and opportunities, but from our own men. My mother, like yours, I won't call her a feminist, but she certainly was a wise woman, and she certainly raised a lot of issues, and she was an independent thinker. And like you, I mean, my parents were divorced when I was 8, and so she was the breadwinner. She was a member of ILGWU, so she didn't make a lot of money. But she worked very hard, and we had there was one child, that was me. So, it was manageable for her to maintain a household of one child. But she was very wise, and she would say, and I don't know if your mother said the same thing to you, but mother would say to me, Yolanda, and I was about 8 years old, she said, if you see something that is wrong, if you see something unjust, it's your duty and responsibility to do something about it. And somehow that stuck somewhere in the back of my mind, because I certainly didn't think about it, obviously. But when issues came up, I was able to challenge them. And I would challenge teachers sometimes when they, miscalculated a score so that I got a B+ instead of an A-. And I would say, wait a minute, this wasn't calculated correctly. Well, what difference does it make anyway? You're going to be pregnant and married by the time you're 17. Teachers told me that. So those are very different times than today. And they were very exciting because being able to step up to the plate, as we've been forced to do, was very empowering, and it made a lot of difference. So you're involved on two fronts, because you continue to be involved, in the labor movement. You were involved in the feminist movement. From what source did that energy, that empowerment, that sense of self-direction, where did that come from, Dolores?
Well, it's interesting because the words that you spoke that your mother told you were very similar to the words my mother told us, myself and my brothers. My mother was coming from New Mexico. People there are very devoted to St. Francis Xavier, who was again devoted to St. Francis of Assisi. And since we were little kids, my mother would say to us, if you see people that need help, you have an obligation to help them. Okay. And don't wait for people to ask you. Yeah. If there's anything you can do to help people, you have that obligation. And you should never take any kind of a gratuity or expect a reward for helping people. This is your obligation. This is what we have to do for being here on earth. So I followed that message from my mother all of my life. And so this is, again, I mentioned when I decided I had the blessing of learning how to do that grassroots organizing, that I had to quit being a teacher, not knowing where my next meal was going to be coming from. But, that's where I think that faith comes from, because you do have to have a lot of faith to do this work. So, I was right in the middle of a divorce, having those 7 kids when I went to Delano, and not knowing where my next meal was going to come from. But, living like the farm workers, I had to go to the food bank to get food. So we got the oatmeal and the cornmeal and the beans and the rice and, just the stuff that we needed to survive on. And we did. We survived on that, for 3 years before the strike started, from 1962 to 65. And then, of course, when the strike started, we had people that gave us donated food. So we didn't have to worry about how we were going to eat. And later on, we got smart and started applying for food stamps, okay? But that was really good, because I actually learned I was living like the farm workers were living. And it was interesting to see how differently you are treated. Even, say, as a Latina, being a middle-class Latina, the way that I dressed, the way that I spoke, I was treated so differently when I went down to Delano and, work with farm workers. I mean, just because, I was not a middle-class teacher then, I was treated differently. I was treated like they treat the farm workers, which is a very abusive type of and discriminatory type of treatment.
Well, this is a classist society on top of everything else. And there are those distinctions, and there are, people are treated differently because of how they're perceived. And the stereotypes that we've had to deal with have often been very negative and false. That's the thing that's so tragic, because when you look at how quickly, really, the generations of Mexican Latinos have moved from, labor to middle class to, CEOs, has really been an incredible trajectory. And, we're now a $2.7 trillion market in this country, and we don't get credit for that. We're not acknowledged for the contributions we made. We're not acknowledged because we've been the first line on COVID, and the people who bring the food, pick the food and deliver it and all the rest of it. All these things are not taken into consideration, nor are all our doctors, lawyers, and engineers acknowledged either. So we're still having to buck false stereotypes and negative stereotyping and the vitriol and hatred, of course, that we've been exposed to, particularly the last several years since 2015. We've come a long way, and yet there's so many battles yet to be fought. You've been there at every step. You've been there with, the farm workers movement, with the women's movement, the early days of the women's movement, and ongoing. You continue to be out front, speaking out. And the beauty of your role, Dolores, I think, is the grace with which you have moved through all of these different endeavors that you have taken on, that you've championed. You're there in the league of the Gandhis, the Cesar Chavez's, the Dr. Martin Luther King's, in the grace and the joy and delight and the energy with which you've endeavored to move social justice forward, to move the needs of the underserved forward, to empower women and others. You've looked at it all across the board. And that is really to be acknowledged. And I think I want to underscore that, because it's been a very impressive career. You never looked for acknowledgement or empowerment. And the truth of the matter is that, you've climbed many mountains. You've risen to the top. You've more recently started a foundation, and we'll talk about that in a moment, the Dolores Huerta Foundation. But just to underscore that and all the achievement that you've accomplished, and all these shifts in your direction and your visioning, you also garnered 2 presidential awards, one from President Clinton and the other one from President Obama. How did that impact you?
Well, I feel like I received those awards on the backs of all of the people that were, went to jail, people that were beaten, the 5 martyrs, the people that were killed in the farm worker movement. So I have received those awards on the backs of many, many people who suffered, to just get basic human rights for farm workers. And, we have to remind people that the rights that we won were only for farm workers in California, except for the toilets. They do have to have toilets throughout the United States for farm workers. That is one of the laws that we passed. And also, when they transport farm workers from one state to the other, they've got to provide them food, they've got to provide them clothing. The other thing is they cannot put farm workers to work in areas where their health or their danger, where their health or their lives can be in danger. So that some of the laws that we passed. And of course, the amnesty bill of 1986, when we were able to get hundreds of thousands of not only farm workers, but people in the cities to get their amnesty. These are the major bills that we passed. But as I say, all of these awards that I receive are on the backs of so many people, 17 million people who boycotted grapes and lettuce. And, so there was a lot of people. I was lucky to be, you might say, on the front line of the struggle, but there were so many people that made it possible. And when it comes to women, we're still fighting to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. It passed in the House at the last Congress, and, we were hoping that we could get it out of the Senate, and we're still working on that. And because a lot of women don't realize that equal rights for women is not in our Constitution. We are only one of a handful of countries that have not ratified the Equal Rights Amendment in our Senate. So we have to keep working on that. As you said earlier, we still have a long way to go.
We have a long way to go, and I just the other day received an email from you from wearing your feminist majority hat. And was a little confused about that because I knew it hadn't passed, and yet Viz Magazine declared that after the vote in what was it, Virginia, that it had been ratified. How much further do we have to go to have the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment this year is the goal?
We only need one more vote, and that is in the Senate of the United States. And Senator Schumer, we have been pressing him to bring it up for a vote. I think that they have made a decision that it doesn't need like the 2/3 vote, but that it could be passed with just a simple majority. So we're still working on it. So keep the faith, okay, that we can get it passed.
Well, we have to pass it. It's absolutely essential because of the Supreme Court ruling to knock down Roe versus Wade after 50 years. And it places too many women, especially underserved women, poor women, Black women, Latino women, Indigenous women. It's difficult to get birth control. How do you limit your families and have the ability to feed them? And then the government doesn't want to, provide assistance to help families that choose not to or are forced to have babies. And so it's a real double-edged sword. And I think we really do, and I hope to step into this with you, to get our activist women, our women leaders to kick in again and really get out there and put pressure on our elected officials to support the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment this year. I don't think people realize how important it is. So underscore that importance again so that people understand it.
Yeah, a lot of women think that they already have that. They don't realize that it would also affect the equal pay for women. Some of the areas that we still have that really haven't really passed yet. We did pass a law that women have to have equal access to promotions, but the equal pay for women, that really hasn't passed yet either.
No, we're still at 65% of the Black women, and they're a little bit about 5% higher than us, and basically we're all way below where the salary levels of men. So yeah, there's a long way to go in terms of equality of opportunity. I hope this year we can see some more activism from women to champion these things and to really join together across party lines, across ethnic and racial lines, across borders of states, to really join in and celebrate this month, Women's History Month, and this year as a time of forward movement for all women everywhere. Because what you've done here in this country, starting out as you did, and then coming to create a foundation, which is another thing I want to ask you about. How did you? Women need to come together, and so that's one thing. And that next point, you joined a very rarefied world of foundations when you created the Dolores Huerta Foundation. How did that come about?
Well, when I left the United Farm Workers, I wanted to go back to do grassroots community organizing like we did in CSO because we were so effective. And Cesar and I had actually talked about this before he passed on. And so I decided to continue to make that dream come true. And so it's been really wonderful because the idea is that you get people to do the work. They have to understand that they are the only ones that they can change their conditions and their situation, that no one is going to come and do it for them. And they may be poor, they may be immigrants, they may not speak the English language, they may not have a formal education, but they have power.
Yes.
They have power. And once they understand that, oh my, it's like magic. It's the same thing like we organize the Farm Workers Union. So we organize through house meetings, and people have done wonders. They have gotten some of their major accomplishments, getting a high school, getting a gymnasium at their middle school, a brand new gymnasium, getting neighborhood parks, getting curbs, sidewalks, and gutters, getting connections to sewers, getting themselves elected to school boards, water boards, city councils, and demanding translations if they don't have them in these different meetings. So right now we're working in 5 counties, northern part of LA County. We're doing a lot of work with homeless up there in that area. In Kern County, we're working to eliminate the school to prison pipeline and suing our Kern High School district, which we won because they expelled 2,500 students, primarily students of color. And we won that lawsuit in 1 year. From 2,500 expulsions, we got it down to less than 21. Okay. And
Wow.
yeah, so we're working also in Tulare County, in Kings County, and Fresno County. And so we've got chapters in all of these areas. We've done over 10,000 COVID vaccinations, had over 250 clinics, which we continue to have every weekend. And we're getting more into the health area because it's such a great need in our community. We have, I mentioned our education program that we have, and also getting kids prepared for college. And then we have a big youth program. We've engaged over 700 youth already in these 5 areas there. To get out there and do their own programs and get involved. We do voter registration, voter education, like we did in CSO, and do a lot of work in the state legislature. We're also working on the issues of climate change, passing bills in the legislature. We just partnered with one of the labor unions here, the IBEW, to pass a bill that is they're going to build charging stations from the Oregon border to the Mexican border.
Wonderful.
Bills, and one of the bills that we passed are already countering. The oil companies have raised money to put it on the ballot, but we passed a bill that they couldn't have oil wells, close to schools and community centers and churches. And we passed that bill, but now the oil companies are trying to get rid of it they put it on the ballot for the next election. But we're ready for them, Now, especially now that the pandemic is over, we can go back to our grassroots community organizing, and we'll be ready. And we partner up with other organizations like California Calls. We worked on passing Proposition 30 and Proposition 55, which brought in over $15 million, I think it's $15 billion into our school systems. So we're busy at work. We're working very hard.
Well, it sounds like it. I'm very excited to hear all of this because, we don't hear all of this good news, in the national media. And I'm delighted. And that's really where a lot is going on behind the scenes, in local boards and in the courts and et cetera, et cetera. So this is really great news. And I acknowledge and applaud everything that the Dolores Huerta Foundation is doing. It is a rarefied atmosphere, but you're just taking the activism and just making it happen right there. I'm excited that there is this ongoing effort and that this will continue on into the future, because I would hope that we have some of your family members and other people that have been trained that are going to carry this work forward too into the next decades.
Yeah, our executive director is Camila Chavez, my youngest daughter. And right now we have 51 full-time staff people. During the elections, we went up to almost 100, almost 200 people that we had on the ground doing canvassing and organizing. And we're also building a building, by the way. Anybody out there that would like to contribute to our building, we're building a Peace and Justice Cultural Center. Wonderful. Right here in Bakersfield, California. And so
where is that going to be?
In Bakersfield, right here in the Central Valley. And we're going to dedicate it to all of the workers that have really fed the nation, starting with the first workers, the indigenous people, the Black farm workers, Latino farm workers, the Asian farm workers, Filipinos, Koreans, Chinese, Japanese, and the Okies, because they were also here, and they had a lot of discrimination against them also. So, and if people want to learn more about the Dolores Huerta Foundation, please go to our website. It's easy, doloreshuerta.org. That's DOLORES.org. Okay. And that's our website. And they can see some of the work that we're doing on a weekly basis. So we're working very hard. And we're building, like all of us, we really have to save democracy, right?
You're absolutely right. It is critical. I don't know that the vast majority of people understand how threatened we have been and continue to be, especially with the Supreme Court the way it exists, and the the unsavory politics that are ongoing. You know, we have to get back to truth. We have to get back to telling the stories that are our real history, our achievements, our contributions. This is something that has to happen, and we're going to have a new ethnic studies requirement for high school graduation that comes into effect in that goes into effect in the fall of 2024. So hopefully that will begin new educational shifting in our schools, and we'll have truth telling in history, and we can tell the full stories so that Latinos and others are included in the making of history. I love the fact that it was the Mexicano Californios in Alta California, when California was, being brought into the Union after the Mexican-American War of 1848. And it was the Mexican Californios who prevented California from becoming a slave state. So these contributions are not shared in our schools. And these are important things to educate and empower everybody to understand that we've all had a part in building a democracy that is now at risk. And why it's at risk is we need to tell these stories, and we need to champion all groups and empower all groups to be part of making this country a more perfect union for everyone. So this is my hope too, as well, that we continue to grow in our democracy and expand opportunities for all people.
And we have to add women's studies.
Yes.
People will know also that there's a third gender. Okay, we have to support our LGBTQ community, and civic studies and labor studies. Okay, I know it's a lot, and we have to just keep advocating for more money for education, because I believe that this is the only way that we're going to stop the haters and the fascists, okay, from taking over our country. So we have a lot of work to do, but it was so wonderful to, be talking with you. And I think that you and I could have another conversation and probably go on for another hour.
We will do that. We will do that. Maybe we'll do this in 2 or 3 parts because these are important. These are important elements and things for people to know, new generations to understand, because not everybody was around 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. And so the stories need to be continued to be shared. And we could talk about, the movement, what is fascism and what is communism and what is totalitarianism. I learned it in school, but we won't go into that here. But I want to thank you, Dolores. Mil gracias for all of your contributions over the decades to empower people of all backgrounds, to provide opportunities for working people, for poor people, for women, for LGBT, for everybody that is part of this woven fabric of our culture and society. So thank you so much for joining me today on Do You See What I See? And I pray God just continues to provide you with guidance and with good health and longevity. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Yolanda. And let's add socialism to that list, okay? Like the kind that they have in Scandinavia, where they have free healthcare, free college education, and free daycare for women, okay? So let's continue the conversation. So
all right. Love you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks our audience. Thank you for our audience for watching. Yolanda Nava, Do You See What I See? Be sure and tune in next month for the next edition.